Hi, Contessas. Welcome to the Career Contessa podcast, your shortcut to being more fulfilled, healthy, and successful at work. I'm your host, Lauren McGoodwin. We're back today with another episode in our 3 and 30 series, which you guys are seem to be really enjoying, which is where we bring you three tangible tips in 30 minutes or less that you can implement in your career right now. My co-host for this series is Marnie Lemonik, a career coach and a regular on the podcast. Hi, Marnie.
Hi, everyone. Today is a special episode because we are kicking off our first ever summer series for 3 and 30. After getting a lot of positive feedback on our Career Clarity episode earlier in the spring, we've decided to dive deeper into the career clarity process and break it down step by step. In today's episode, we're starting at the very beginning. So, how to actually get started on determining your next career move. We asked you all what the hardest part of the career clarity process was, and the very beginning was the resounding winner. We'll dive into more concrete strategy development based on this episode's learnings in July. So that's what you can expect for the next part of our series. But before we dive into all the tips, let's do our usual catch up because I feel like Lauren, you and I both have been in busy and book season. So give me the update on the start of your summer.
Well, I will say, I think for when you have kids, the start of summer is actually like the end of school. And so what happens is like you have a million little details for the end of school. I always joke like they're trying to kill us, parents, like mentally break us, which they have, like they succeed, which is like the last day of school. There's like crazy sock day, there's pajama day, there's water day, but then there's another water day, but then don't forget this, and there's teacher appreciation. So I do feel like, my kickoff to summer is really the end of school. And then I just got back from a work trip, which again, for working parents, listen to this, like just the pure logistics to like leave your house for 4 days is, I mean, it takes like a PhD in puzzle calendar scheduling. I feel like I don't have the PhD, which is why I'm struggling with it. I'm sure someone who does is really good at it. And then I am going to take the kids on my first solo trip. I'm going to take them up to Portland to hang out with my mom. See, my grandpa's 100, so we're, going to make time for that. And so I'll report back on the next episode how this first solo trip goes with like a 2.5-year-old and a 4-year-old.
Are you
Pray for
all
me.
flying? You're not
Yeah,
traveling.
no, no, no. We're gonna fly. And at least they're at the age, and I know some people might not like this, but they're at the age where they're into screens. So I feel like this is only possible because they can like somewhat entertain themselves and happily on a plane for a couple hours. Although I will say then there's like taking like ending the screen time, which is really, really rough. So I have very low expectations and I'm hoping for the best. Anyway, that's my life. What about you?
A trip brought to you by Screens. That's so
Yeah.
exciting. I have been in summer prep mode for sure. I think last time we chatted, I was in the middle of moving and I'm preparing to move again. I have this weird situation where I'm moving multiple times, basically, between temporary and permanent apartments. So I've been in a logistics hole with that. And then I have my best friend's wedding this weekend. So that's been a lot of
Fun.
prep in a fun way. So yeah, I feel like I'm in a very different season because I don't have the logistics of the end of school. So I
Yeah.
only empathize, but not fully relate on that front.
No, it's funny. I've obviously been in your shoes and now I'm in the working. I don't think you can possibly get it until you're in it, which is like enjoy not being in it while, that stage of life and whether that continues or not, like I feel like the best thing people can do is like just be kind to the working parents in your life because they are doing their best, really. It's rough out there. But I also think this is a good episode because there are a lot of working parents, women specifically, where you do either you want to go back to work, you want to change jobs because your life stages happen. And it's not just working parents, but I do feel like when you have these big life stages, your career become, especially like for me, my career was everything. And then I had kids and I was like, okay, it literally can't be everything. So like, what is the next thing? And so I'm excited about today's episode because I do feel like this is very much any new life stage kicks off a question of like career questions, like what am I doing? I need to figure out my next career move. Like, what does that look like? So I'm really excited that we're doing this episode and we can base it off of like what we've seen work and coaching for you. And also like I just lived through this. So anyway, I think this is really good timing because even though the summer is a really busy season, sometimes I also feel like it's a season of prep where you're like kind of getting ready for the next thing. Like in the fall, that always feels like the back to school season. I think as an adult, you still kind of feel that way a little bit. Um, so I think this is good timing, is what I'm trying to say in a really long-winded way.
I agree. And I think even if you have summer vacations and some time off over this season, there's pieces of this process that you'll be able to pull in when you have a little bit more of the mental space, which brings us to our first step. So I'd love to dive in if you're ready, Lauren.
Yeah, let's do it.
Perfect. So, step one of this process is really making the space to think big picture about your career. We're calling this step one, but you can almost think of this as step zero. While it may sound obvious that you need to make the space to think more critically about your career, this is a step I see so many people try and skip in career coaching. We tend to think we can multitask this, much like we multitask every other thing in our life. But I promise you will get more bang for your buck with this experience if you clear the mental clutter first. As a proof point for this step, I want to explain something I've been obsessed with for years now because it's what Bill Gates has done for his career at Microsoft. And I think even though he does a more extreme version of it, we can take some inspiration and pull it into our own lives. So, Bill Gates has this ritual that he calls a Think Week, where he goes every year to a remote cabin in the woods without Wi Fi to think more creatively about business. He's credited this experience to pretty much all of the most strategic, successful pivots that Microsoft has made as a company because he has that mental space to think creatively and just take himself out of the day to day. Obviously, you don't need to physically yourself off from the world or go into a forest to do this, but let me give you a few mini examples that I've test drove myself or that I've had clients do that they've really enjoyed. Option one, you could dedicate a Sunday afternoon at your favorite coffee shop alone, headphones on, listening to instrumental music, something that really helps you focus, and just stream of conscious journal where you're at in your career and the best and hardest parts of this season. If you are prepping for a pivot, like coming back from maternity leave or whatever it may be, this is a really helpful one. If you just have no sense of where you're at yet, I would get everything out of your mind onto paper. The second option, if you're a little bit more social, you could partner with a trusted friend or coworker and make a strategy day out of it. You could go to a WeWork, use a whiteboard, do a fun presentation at one of your houses. Just make it feel like an event and something that you can actually enjoy and hold each other accountable because you're not doing it alone. And then last but not least, obviously I have to put this in here because I'm biased, is chat with someone outside of your day-to-day life. That could be a career coach, it could be a therapist, or even a mentor who you're not super close to personally. The key with this part is whenever you chat with someone who doesn't know you super well, like your friends and family who want the best for you and love you just as you are, that person can sometimes push you to grow and develop into a direction that you haven't necessarily thought about yet.
I love this step, and I absolutely agree. This is very much step zero. For me, this process, in case anybody's wondering, it took months. Like it was like probably spread out over a 3-ish month process, partially because like most of us don't have the ability to just stop everything and do this. And to be fair, some of this you can't like hurry up. Like you can't just sit there and think really hard and clarity comes to you, right? We've talked about that. So another idea is I had a couple of friends that were in similar life stages, and we would do these walk and talks because something for me about, I know I've said this a lot on the show, but like walking while I am like processing and thinking helps me a lot. So I would just give, I'm just sharing some other ideas, but these are all basically the same thing. And think about how you learn best. How do you process best? How do you get into your flow best? The other thing, and I liked that because I felt like we kind of took turns being coaches to each other, but also being listeners. The other thing I think about this too is when you are journaling, it's really helpful to maybe like keep a note going on your phone. And like when you're doing things at work that really energize you, take note of it. Like whether you're writing that down in the journal, in your note, like you email it to yourself when you hear things on a podcast, like start just like randomly start doing that. When you see something on LinkedIn, whatever it is, start saving it. And then when you go and do these dedicated days, maybe go look at your inspiration. Like, what have you saved? I mean, this is almost like, that version of like making a vision board. And you could make an actual vision board. Those are tough for me because I feel like you have to have like physical images and like sorry, the days of having the physical magazine that makes this whole process really fun is over. So anyway, I share that tidbit too because I think this step is 1000% where you need to start, and you also need to like tailor this step to what works best for you. But the strategy is there. You need time to process. Give yourself some grace and some time to do that, right?
I'm glad you called that out. Yeah, because all of my examples were single moments in time, but it is a longer process often.
Yeah, yeah. And then I think step two, after you've done this, is, and this is again, this is like something I did and Marnie has seen in her coaching clients, is like, and you can do these at the same time. Usually they work better at the same time, is go on what I call a listening tour. So once you have, made that space in your calendar, this is like a little bit more of that concrete step where you're going to run a personal career exploration audit starting with skills and strengths. So I was telling you, like, hold on to the inspiration in step one. This is step two of like, now you're going to do something with that. So this is where I would tell you to look at that inspiration that you saved, make some time in your calendar to start thinking about these three things. The first one is things people thank you for, even outside of work. Like when you are getting praised for being super helpful or doing a good job or whatever it was, they're thanking you, they appreciate it. What is it? And it can be even outside of work or in work. Number two is problems others bring to you to solve. So when people are like, oh, I thought of you for this thing, or I'm struggling with this, can you help me? Like, what are those? Because what we're trying to do at some point, and we'll get to that more in these concrete steps, is find some themes, right? What are the narratives? What are the themes that you have? I just interviewed someone yesterday. She called it your power asset. So I think that's another really good way. And she described it as like you want to have two professional power assets and one interpersonal power asset. And so an example of that would be like people come to me when they need to turn a report into something without the jargon of like data analytics, like telling the story of data. But the interpersonal one would be like, I'm really good at bringing different people together. Like I'm a connector. So just to give you an example of those things. Okay, the third thing is that you would want to write down in this step is what do you Google for fun or obsessively research? Like, what are you just truly interested in when nobody's watching? For example, I loved interior design. Like I love all things people doing design and building houses and whatever it was. Like, and that actually doesn't connect to my career at all that I do. But it gives you an idea of like, okay, I'm interested in this stuff. What is it that I'm interested in with that? And sometimes you, again, we're going to kind of get to the more concrete stuff, but you can sometimes connect the dots. I had a friend who really loved makeup. Like she was really, that was just something she was genuinely interested in. And then when it came time to kind of think about companies, like for example, that helped guide her. So it's good to have this thought just to keep in mind because like I said, we're going to get into the more concrete things. Okay, the next part of this like listening tour and this career exploration audit after you've kind of started to determine what are my skills and my strengths, what energizes me at work. The last one I would actually add to this is like what skill do you have that people will compensate you for? This is really important because we are job searching. Okay. Next, I want you to do a cool jobs audit. So consider whose career you really admire right now. What do they do? Where do they work? What industry, product focus? Anything like that. This is really important because I know some people are like, oh, comparison is the thief of joy. If you do too much, yes. If you go, extremes are never good. But sometimes comparison lets you in on something that you want. It gives it's a hint and a breadcrumb to help guiding you toward like what is it about that person's life that I love? Is it the fact that they, work at a remote company? Is it the fact that they are working in an industry I like? Whatever it is. So start making a list of those. When you like curate all this inspiration and these answers, it's really cool because you kind of like lay all the pieces out at some point and you start to see like the themes become very obvious to you because you've gotten rid of the noise. Okay, the last part of the audit is to host the actual listening tour. This is where you're going to reach out to a select group of maybe past or current colleagues to discuss your strengths and aspirations for your next role with the primary goal of listening to their insights and gathering information about potential career paths that align with your skills and interests. This can be something where you're asking them, like if it's someone you worked with before, like, what do you see as my top strength? If it's somebody who the other thing you can do in a listening tour is ask them if there's anyone else that you should talk to. If you're talking to someone who maybe doesn't know you that well, you could say, these are my strengths. These are the things I'm interested in. You know, any advice like on potential career paths I should explore? Do you know anyone who's similar? And like, you can kind of look at their career path. So the listening tour is really valuable because you are trying to, back to Marnie's earlier point, get advice from professionals, not necessarily like your parents and your best friends, who know you in that way. Like your mom doesn't go to work with you every day. She knows you on a personal level. And so you need the people who are at work. So I have seen, and actually in my book, there's a whole chapter on listening tours, including like a script. But honestly, at this point, you could just go to Chat GPT and be like, I want to go on a listening tour. How would I reach out to somebody and ask them for it? The and the other thing I will say about the listening tour is like not everyone's going to have time to do it. So, be mindful if you do it. Maybe send a scheduling link so they can easily schedule something and, in the most polite way that you can say it. Because the thing about informational interviews and listening tours is right now everybody is so overwhelmed with so many things that a cold reach out is not your best when it comes to this part of the career stage. So you really want to focus on your network during this stage.
The call out to have a scheduling link is so small but so helpful because the momentum that you lose when you have to go back
Yeah.
on scheduling, no one is going to be at a higher point of saying yes than when they first get that email and that first response. So you might as well just give them everything that they need in that window to commit to it rather than having that unnecessary back and forth.
Yeah, and I would just one caveat is be like very open with your schedule. Don't have like one date in 2 weeks from now. Like if you're gonna send this, make sure you've cleared as much as you can, move other things around because to your point, you want to capitalize on that momentum. Also, and again, you can ask ChatGPT to help you in this writing, but you have to be very careful about how you word it so it doesn't sound like you're asking for a favor and then also like work around my schedule. So there are very careful ways to word it so it appears as like this is a plus and not a like a command to the person.
I love that. If you are working with chat and you want a human check on it, feel free to DM me on Instagram because I love ghostwriting stuff like that. I think it's so fun. You dropped so many good nuggets, Lauren. I think the thing that I really want to just plus one to quickly before we move into the third step is the power of hearing people explain your strengths and hearing people explain potential passive interest to you, because there really is something about hearing it from someone else versus it just being in your mind. I always use this analogy with my clients. When you go to a restaurant and you ask the waiter for advice and you say, should I get the chicken or the shrimp? And you think you're torn on these two entrees. And then the minute they say chicken, you realize you have this internal disappointment and you think, okay, I guess I wanted shrimp this whole time. That mirroring exercise is so powerful and it is nearly impossible to do in your own head. So the listening tour is really valuable for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I also think too, like when I was going through the process, I was also trying to make a pivot. And so sometimes when you're trying to make a pivot, I think it's even more challenging because you're not quite sure, like you don't know what to like sink your claws into yet. You know what I mean? Like, and I know the next episode of the series will be more strategy, but it's like you have to talk to a lot of people. You have to do all this engagement because you can't really narrow it down yet. And just so you guys know, our goal for this episode is that by the end of it, these tips will help you not pick maybe one swim lane. Okay, if you're lucky, you're like, I absolutely know this is the swim lane, the career I want. But can you narrow down the swim lanes from like 25 options to like two or three? And that's really the goal in this first step of career clarity. Are you gathering enough information that you are starting to see these themes that start to paint some more narrow picture for you?
It won't always feel as overwhelming as it is right at the beginning when
Yeah,
everything's an option. It's totally the hardest part.
agreed. It's definitely the most overwhelming because all you want to do is be like, what am I doing? Because once I know what I'm doing, I can create a plan, but I can't create a plan until I know what I'm doing. It's very frustrating cycle, I feel like.
Especially for all the high achieving women. I feel like that's a cycle that I see a lot of people get stuck in is I'm used to creating my own destiny to a certain extent, and now I'm in this nebulous situation where it feels like I don't know how to grip onto a specific thing, and I want to be able to throw my ambition at it, but I don't even know the direction I'm throwing that ambition. So
Yeah.
That brings us really perfectly to our third step, which is getting more and more focused down here. And that is translating all of those learnings you have from your listening tour and all the tips Lauren just shared into culture and company fits. When it comes to thinking about your next step, we often lean pretty heavily on the position fit or the titles and industries that we're going after. We get really focused on, okay, I think I want to be in marketing. I think I want to be this level. And maybe there's cool companies that you've always admired, but we're often not thinking about the culture or work environment of our future company in as detailed of a way as we should be. Because ultimately, you're looking for companies not only that you admire from a mission perspective or you just know the brand, but that line up with all of your superpowers, all of the values that you've determined are really important to you. And there's a few categories I want to throw at you specifically in this step so you can start to think through various ends of the extreme, if you will. If you find this part helpful and you want a more thorough agenda, I have a very structured process I walk all my clients through, and I've made a dummy agenda so that I can share it with everyone. If you just follow me on Instagram, it's at Marnie Lemonik. We'll put it in the show notes, and then DM me the word clarity. I will send you this full agenda your way so you can go a hair deeper. But let's talk about what it looks like to actually reflect on the work environment of a potential company. There's three factors I want you to dive into and reflect on further. The first is the size of the company. So obviously, we don't want to speak in too much of a general tone, but you can really think about small companies versus large companies and the concept of working at a small company where your responsibilities are probably more broad. You're wearing a lot of hats. If you've ever worked at a startup, you definitely know how this goes, or you've been an entrepreneur, you're doing everything. Versus a large company, you're normally a little bit more specialized in your role. And instead of touching every piece of the process, you're only going deep on one specific piece because there's a larger team to support you. So that's one category. The second category is the stage of the company, which sounds similar to size, but is actually a little bit different. So the stage of the company is effectively how old the company is. Is it a startup early on in its career, or is it an established larger company? Normally, if it's a startup, things are a little bit more unstructured. So regardless of all the themes or responsibilities that you're touching, there's probably not a lot of process, right? You're creating things for the first time versus a structured or more established company where there could be more red tape. There's a lot of structure, a lot of process, but that can also lend to some issues if you're someone who likes to innovate and change things quickly. I had this in my own career where I used to work at iHeartRadio, which is a massive established media company. There was a lot of processes. I worked with hundreds of people during my time there. And then I moved to a smaller tech company, ClassPass, and was on a newer team of theirs where nothing was established. I was their first AM hire in New York, and it was kind of the opposite side of things. So if you've had experiences with either one, it's extra helpful because you can start to think about what did I love about a structured environment? What did I love about an unstructured environment? The third category I want you to think about is industry norms. So, outside of the size of the company, the stage of the company, there are certain norms that are tied to industries for a reason, and stereotypes aren't always 100% true, but you can normally glean what the lifestyle looks like for larger industries that you're familiar with. In my own career, I had clients at one company where I was dealing with entertainment executives, very fiery, emailing at 11:30 p.m., a different type of personality. And then I had clients that were HR leaders that were a little bit more corporate, polished, maybe working 9 to 5. So you can see those personalities start to come to life. If you haven't experienced it yet, you'll have to go through some roles to feel it out. But you probably have people in your own life, similar to Lauren's tip, where if you really admire someone who is a lawyer, what is it about the law industry that you really admire that you might want to know? And once you get clear on all these factors, again, it's size of company, stage of company, industry norms, you can then start to compile your own ideal company target list. And I would plan to have 10 to 20 on the final docket, but you can have more at the beginning and then always narrow down as time goes on.
Yeah, I this was a big part of my process because look, I feel very strongly that where you work almost matters more than like what you're working on because jobs change so much. Like people say this all the time. I was hired to do this thing and then this thing changed. So like I actually think adaptability in today's world and being able to pivot is like the most important skill you can have, but that's a different conversation. So when it comes to your target companies, um, doing research and like you could use tools like Glassdoor, you can do I think there's one called Blind. There's like Levels, FYI. Those are kind of a little bit more techy, but like I was specifically, so for me, if this is helpful, when I was making my target company list, I was like, I want to work 100% remote. Like I don't want to, so, and I didn't want to work somewhere where they were doing hybrid, whatever. Partly I live in LA and I was targeting kind of like more tech companies because that's what I had been from before. So I had the struggle of like, who's not going to like then demand you go back to the office. So anyway, long story short, part of my search was dictated by what companies were there. And so you could also like reverse these steps a little bit where you start with the company list and then you kind of apply that listening tour stuff I said, where you're like reaching out to people. I think I think it's like a mishmash depending on like where you are in your stage of life. For some people, they're like, I care less about what company, or like, I really want to be in person because I'm earlier in my career. So, um, include all of the like professional things that Marnie just said, but also think of like your lifestyle things that you really want to have. You want remote work? Do you want to go work at some place that is going to give you equity, more equity and maybe a little less comp, or do you want more comp and you're okay with no equity or less equity? Like these are also very important logistical things to think about and to determine what you need. Like one step I used to always tell people is like understand like what your salary range is that you need to have to live, because not only sometimes people will put it in the job description, more of them are, but back in the day they weren't. And so it was also like a really important thing when they would ask about your salary expectations. And so these are all part of the search, right? And the idea is that by the end of this process, whether it takes you a month, 3 months, and maybe like, I feel like once you start thinking about this, you think about it a lot, you kind of become a little obsessive about it. Um, but once you've narrowed it down to like, okay, and again, I'll use my own example. I narrowed it down to employer branding, learning and development, and content marketing. Those were my three swim lanes that I determined after I did like my skills and interests and what energizes me, where have my wins been in my career, based on my listening tour. Those are my three swim lanes. And then I had a target company list, and Atlassian was on that list. I won't tell you the other ones because I feel like that's unfair. But the point being is like you that helped. That helped take me from like this big ocean of like I can do everything and anything to I now have a little bit more of a direction. And I felt like someone sort of like took off these blurry glasses and gave me ones where I could actually see out of them. And I was like, okay, now I can move forward. I feel like I can make an action plan. So, you know, I think the last part is just sort of define what are those non-negotiables for you. What kind of work-life balance do you want? What kind of company culture? What type of like physical workplace do you want to work with a big team? Do you want to be a manager? Do you want to be an individual contributor? What level? Like the more you think through these things, the more you are proactively directing the direction of this than you are just reacting to whatever comes your way. And while this is not the fastest way to get a new job, sure, you can just hit easy apply on LinkedIn. This is the way to find a job that you will feel much better and it will be a better fit. You'll be more aligned to, you'll understand your why behind it. So, I hope these steps give you something tangible to do in this process that feels very abstract and like you're just waiting for someone to knock on your door. I know that's really, really, really hard.
It's hard too when you know you want to make a change, but there's no timeline that you're held to. And I see that a lot with clients who are in a job that they don't love, but then they're also not miserable, which, is ideal. We
Yeah.
don't want to be miserable, but then you don't have the driving force of being so uncomfortable that you're pushed to take action. So if you can just start the process, like Lauren said, once you start doing this, you tend to think about it more, you have the momentum of actually taking action. It does get easier, but this initial move is the hardest part.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll say is block off time on your calendar. When I was going through this process, I blocked off an hour, I think it was like every Monday and Wednesday for me to just like freely give myself permission to dive into this. And sometimes it was really good use of time, and sometimes I was like, wow, that was like I just like went down a rabbit hole of something that had nothing really to do with this, but like I was dedicating the time and I was keeping myself accountable, which is also why I really like find another friend who might be going through something similar and keep yourselves accountable to it. I've always believed in the power of like a job search buddy. It can be incredibly helpful to just have someone who knows what it feels like. This is common among humans in general. Like we want to find people who understand and can relate to how we're feeling, and it makes you feel less alone, which is a really good thing. Because sometimes I feel like a part of this process is just like, is this weird? Is this hard for everybody? Like you just want validation, you know? So
Definitely. I think this was the great first step episode, and we're excited to hear everyone's thoughts. Thank you, as always, for listening to another 3 and 30. We'll be back in July with our next episode. Like we mentioned, it'll be part two of this series, really focused on how to take action on your newly found career clarity. And if you have any questions you want to see answered in July's episode, you can always DM me directly on Instagram or reach out to Lauren on LinkedIn.
amazing. Thank you for listening to this episode. Don't forget to rate and review our show. It really does help us so much so that we can be back here each week and we'll see you for next one. Thanks, guys.